couple of questions. Just the first one's a clarification. You mentioned that bayonet lug is no longer going to be a qualifying feature. Is that what I heard you say?
I think that's right. It's taken out of the definition of, it's taken out of the, what is a military style chair.
Okay, so that doesn't count anymore.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
What are the other features?
My other, sorry.
It's like collapsible stock, flash press roll.
If I want to keep my carry permit, eventually you're going to capture the fact that I have a magazine for it. My magazine being registered or being down on paper that I own, how is that going to make someone safer? Just if I'm obeying the law, renewing my permit. How does that keep me from, or anyone for that matter, from using that in crime? What's the point? Just so you know that they're there?
By itself, it does little or nothing.
Just
Absolutely true. By itself, it's not. But as part of a bigger mosaic, school safety, mental health, some gun control, the point that John made before, if there was a couple options. Take them all, which we were not, and trust me, this is a big number of folks, take them all. And John did a fabulous job, and with some others behind closed doors to fight that back. Or grandfather things. In order to grandfather, you got to know who's got them. So if people are like, well, registration, and then you always hear the argument because it's a concern. And I think it's a registration, first step to confiscation. Well, registration is your defense. No, this is my stuff. I own it. Here it is. You can't take it. End of story. That's the end of the discussion.
But it could go the other way. It could be a
Here,
confiscation.
Could it?
Could possibly confiscation.
I'm sorry.
It could go the other way. It could lead to a confiscation list.
Not under the current law, no.
Not under the current law. Not under the current Constitution.
Okay.
Right.
And one more part of that. My rifle was registered in '94. Do I have to register it again?
No.
No. Absolutely do not.
Absolutely do not.
What is it? A long gun?
AR-15.
So
Ugly black one.
So I don't. Are those the only two you have?
What's that?
Are those the only two you have?
No.
Okay, no, I just don't.
yeah.
Based on what you've told me, you have a pistol permit already.
Yes.
Nothing will change regarding your pistol permit. You still have to renew it every 5 years. You will have to, by a date, go online and register whatever magazine you have for that pistol, whether it's 1 or 5 or other magazines you have. The long gun is already registered. You don't have to do anything with that. If you were to purchase a new long gun, your pistol permit would suffice for that certificate of eligibility because you've already passed through the fingerprinting and background check.
Right.
So other than registering, going online, filling out a form, I don't think there's anything else that you would have to do under this current law.
Okay, because there was some confusion. Obviously,
There's a lot of confusion.
Re-registering, what was the point?
That's why we need to continue to have these conversations so people can separate, you know, what the real facts are and what you may or may not have to do under this law versus what, you know, you might see on 30 seconds on a news station.
Okay. Well, that's great for us to own them already, but that future generations will not have this opportunity to own a firearm like that. You know,
They'll own it with a different platform.
Well,
Same thing that happened in California. They changed the platform. They reduced the shots. They changed the stock. It's not foldable. You know, the hand grip is behind the action. They change it, and they have a California compliant AR-15.
exactly, which means this is all pointless.
Well, by itself, it's absolutely pointless. 100% agree. By itself, absolutely pointless.
I own a Mini 14 also, fires the same caliber,
Most
detachable magazines, but nobody's even looking at it. Not that I want anybody to, but it is off the table. It's not even a consideration, but it does exactly the same thing. So that's why a lot of us are irritated about the pointlessness, the arbitrary features and capacities that are being talked about. They mean nothing. I understand you have to do something.
Some would argue that the magazine limit is more important than the assault weapons ban. People have made that argument. I don't disagree with that argument. That to me, the magazine size is more important than what gun you're shooting it from. If you have a semi-automatic handgun or a semi-automatic rifle, it's the same semi-automatic action. One bullet, one trigger. I understand that, but
and that argument cuts both ways. I mean, that cuts both ways. If you can change the clip of 10 in 2 seconds, then do it. Then do it. I mean, and listen, I agree with most of what you're saying. But if you're saying, because I can change the clip in 2 seconds, I should be allowed to have a 30-shot clip as opposed, that doesn't make, conceptually, that cuts both
You're
ways.
just pointing out the arbitrary nature of it. Whether you have a 30-round mag or you change 3 mags in 2 seconds, you're getting the same outcome. So why
Well,
is
look,
that's arbitrary?
and I would just say that there are people who disagree.
I
That's all.
understand.
There are people who believe that if you,
Obviously, legislators do because
there are people who will argue with you, and I'll make their argument for you, that he had multiple 30-round magazines for his AR-15.
he's a whack job. We know that.
Oh, can you let me finish?
Yeah.
He exhausted fully 3 of the 30-round magazines. So, now we don't know which one he had in there first because there were other magazines that had 15 bullets left, 11 bullets left, etc. But if you want to assume he went in there, okay, with a magazine in, and exhausted 30, and changed, and put in another 30, and changed, and put in another 30, to get those first 90 bullets out, he would have had to change 7 times, not 2.
No, they stuck them to each other, so they just put.
Well,
But you still say.
but there, look, and as many experts as there are who can change them quickly, I've had those same experts say, you don't know what's going to happen in that type of a traumatic or whatever, or a military or whatever kind of situation. And so the balance for me on the magazine was, and whether it's 10 or 15 or, okay, do I believe that you still have the ability to defend yourself at home with a 10-round magazine so that you can exercise your right? And if the answer is yes, and I believe it's constitutional, if I think it could force someone to change their magazines more in this type of situation so that kids can get out, I'm willing to give it a try. Now, we had a magazine limit of 10 in this country for 10 years. No court found it unconstitutional. New York has had a magazine ban for years. No court has found it unconstitutional. And I grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut. I love Fairfield. Bill Ruger Sr. started a wonderful company, Sturm Ruger. He went to Congress, I think in 1988 or 89, and said, Sturm Ruger is okay with a 10-round magazine limit. He even said something a little, that I wouldn't say that, no honorable man needs more than 10 rounds in a gun, I think Bill Ruger Sr. once said. So people can disagree on this, but that's some of their arguments, and that's my analysis.
I would turn in my.
I think, the gentleman's next. He's had his hand up for about half an hour.
Thank you. Just 2 simple questions. The number of crimes committed with guns last year, and how many of those people were repeat offenders? And from my take, I've heard your discussions and your arguments for the case of various things that are, to a certain extent, minutiae in the scheme of things when you talk about gun control on a state or national level. But separating bad people from guns is the only way to. And that's the end game. I mean, I'm curious. In addition to answering those 2 quick questions, just what was your objective? What was your goal when you set out to be a part of this legislation?
You get it.
I mean, the goal was, is there a way we can make Connecticut safer with respect to gun violence? So for example, trying to crack down on straw purchasing. We know that a lot of guns that are used in gun crimes, crimes committed with guns, were originally purchased legally and were then used illegally. One of the things Connecticut passed years ago was one of the first states, and there was a lot of uproar about it. And I don't believe any law-abiding citizen, I haven't heard one case who's been hurt by it, was passed a lost and stolen firearms. So that if you legally own a gun and someone steals it, you have to report it so we can track and find out where that gun now being used illegally came from. Because we want to track illegal guns. So there's, I think, $1 million. There might be more. We'll put in as much as needed. The commitment is there, part of this bill, on a firearms trafficking task force, which we had in Connecticut and was actually useful in getting illegal guns off the streets of Connecticut. Didn't completely do it. So that's one of the goals. How can you reduce gun violence? For example, looking at the voluntary commitment look back. there's some belief that that may, if somebody voluntarily puts himself into a psychiatric unit and can't access their gun for 6 months, that may prevent some people from taking their lives with guns. That's, not the fault of any gun owner, but that is something that happens in our society that maybe we could stop as well. The safe storage rules are intended to try to protect people from accidental gun deaths, because those happen way too much. So those are the types of things, and as I've said, I understand we disagree, to the extent that there are bad people who have access to guns, whether legally or illegally, I would like to try to see if we can reduce the damage and harm they can do. Better school security would have protected those kids better. Okay? Now that school has better security than a lot of schools. In my daughter's middle school, I could walk right in, walk down the hallway, and go into a classroom. So without that locked door, we could have done a lot more damage. Magazines, in my opinion, is a way to limit the damage somebody. That's
my
my
answer to
goal.
your question. I mentioned it before. My calculus was, I want to focus as much, if not more, on the people than the device. Because the thing that makes an assault weapon primarily is the guy holding it, and anyone that doesn't believe that's just not paying attention. So my analysis was, let's focus on the people first, and then we'll look at devices. If we have meaningful reform on the people that do this crime, do these type of crimes, and I'm saying these type of crimes, not the Atalantans, also the stuff that goes on in New Haven and Bridgeport and Hartford. That's where the real gun violence is happening. We look at the people first, and then make some kind of effort to tweak the device of part of the equation that might actually help. Like I said in the beginning, that's how I approach this. If we do people and device, I can support it. If it was all devices, absolutely not. Because all we're doing is a symbolic gesture to say, no more mean-looking guns, and we do nothing to make anybody safer. If we're gonna focus on the areas that need to be focused on, the bad guys, the people, the mentally ill, and then potentially dry up. Part of the mosaic, it's not the end-all be-all. Part of the mosaic of the solution is to some focus on the devices. That was my approach. It still is.
I guess my only point on the I'm curious if you know the answer to those other two questions.
The number of gun crimes committed.
Yeah.
I thought I had it right.
The number of gun crimes and by repeat offenders.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a high number.
It's just going back and hearing the stories about the federal bans on assault weapons or whatever that was in effect in the 90s or whatever. And my personal opinion is you can look at the devices, but there's such a volume of these devices in the circulation in the states these days that you will be generations before you'll see an appreciable statistical impact of what you're passing tomorrow as it relates to gun crimes. I mean, or just gun violence in general. That's just a personal opinion. It's not based on fact.
Look, you might be right. I mean, the statistics I've heard is that there may be over 300 million guns in America, maybe more guns than there are people. Okay, and that is because we have a defined right in our Constitution that actually preceded the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees the right that existed before the Constitution, right? The law with respect to machine guns, which was changed maybe a generation ago, has significantly reduced the machine guns. Now, I haven't looked at the study as to why. I think there are 771 currently that were grandfathered in Connecticut. It may be because semi-automatic weapons have, become a replacement for what people bought, so they didn't need to do that. So I don't know how long it would be, but the idea, for example, the magazines is if you prohibit sale immediately, then at some point you may get to a place where there are only